Okay, today the topic is kind of an extension of the last workshop where we looked at just some general front end tools. So we looked at HTML, CSS, and then kind of tying it together with JavaScript a little bit. Now we want to, I guess, expand the functionality parts of the JavaScript part into maybe some more complex ideas. So when we looked at JavaScript, there was a lot we could do there. There was a lot of options, but we pretty much had to do everything from scratch. So we had to modify the elements in our HTML document by hand, and there wasn't a lot of tools available to I guess streamline that process. So that's where these frameworks come in, front end frameworks. They're basically bundles of JavaScript that have already been written for us, okay, that we can do a lot of stuff with. So let me open things up here. There's another document for this workshop. Once again, in the forum tab, workshops, there's the view one, and this is what I've opened. So we're gonna look at view. If you want to follow along, there's a couple things you'll need installed. You'll need an installation of Node.js and npm or Node Package Manager. That usually comes with Node.js. You can go to the bottom of this document, and there's this link here, which has some handy information on installing all this stuff. You can install it straight from the Node.js website, or I guess the npm website recommends using a version manager. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. But if you can open up a terminal and you can type node v, and this shows up, and you can type npm v, and that shows up, then you're good to go. That's all you'll need. So I guess let's start at the beginning. About Vue, so we talked about that. It's a JavaScript framework for web development. Unlike some other popular frameworks, the main ones being React and Angular, it's not owned by a company. This is kind of just, I guess, open source, developed, maintained by a third party, no company attached to it. React being owned by Facebook, and Angular is owned by Google. So there's no tie-ins to massive corporations or anything like that. Why we want to use Vue? There's a lot of third-party plugins available for Vue. So once we've kind of gone over how to use it, and you want to maybe, I guess, include more functionality than what we go over, there's a ton of plugins that already exist that probably do what you want to do. So it makes the development process a lot easier. Um, Also working with front end stuff, right? Online references are your friend. So there are probably millions of people trying to develop websites. And if you have a question or there's something that you're trying to do and you don't know how to do it, chances are someone else has tried to do it also. I would challenge you to find a case where you're the first person trying to do something. Most things have been done or at least attempted before. So when you look things up, there's tons of resources, right? Don't hesitate to just Google your problem and see what happens. Chances are the answer you're looking for is literally the first result. The only other thing I want to mention about Vue before we start talking, here's the reference page for it at the bottom, the documentation. This is the website vuejs.org. We're going to use this a lot. We'll look through here a lot for, I guess, going through the workshop. And then you should also use this website a lot. Okay, very helpful. There's a switch at the top, API preference, options versus composition. And that just means there's two different versions of the Vue API, and working with, I guess, Vue. There's the options version and then there's the composition. I'm going to stick with the options one, and I think most people tend to stick with options, but just be aware that they are different, right? Like we can look, where's an example where it changes. Registration should change. No, props. Yeah, you can see the code between these two changes slightly, and then the reference also changes. So we'll stick to options. And then also, if you end up Googling stuff, you might want to specify that you're looking for how to do something with the options API versus the composition one, because you kind of do things a little bit different between them. just a note before we start. Okay, so we'll start with, I guess, creating a project. There's a handy tool that will let us create a Vue project. And as long as we have these, the dependencies that I talked about earlier, Node.js and NPM, we can just run it from the command line. So in the document, I've put a little blurb about, I guess, updating your Node.js and your NPM. If you do the default way of installing these on Linux, you'll also have to update them. They need the latest versions. So if the process of running this Vue project is giving you some errors, first thing you should try is updating both Node.js and NPM to be the latest versions. So that's just how you would do that on Linux. This is the command we're looking for here. So npm init vue at latest. Just one command. So let's run that and see what happens. So npm init vue at latest. Okay, we'll run that. It gives us a nice little UI initialization tool. So first thing it wants to know is a project name. So we'll give it a project name, Zeus Club Vue app. Okay, and then it's going to give us a bunch of options. We can just say no for all these for now. If you want to learn more about them, I guess that reference site will tell you all about these things, but we don't need any of them. We can just say no. So we'll say no for these. No, 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 no. And there we go. And it's just extra tools. So now we've done initializing, tells us to enter that directory, run these commands, npm install, and then npm run dev. Okay, so, well, let's do that. We'll go into that directory. We'll run npm install. We'll let it do its thing. It's gonna install some dependencies for us. That's all good. And then we'll do npm run dev. And there we go. Okay, so it's running. We don't see anything yet, but it's running on a local server. Okay, and it told us the URL we need to look at here too. So we'll click on that. And here we go. This is our Vue app, right? This is the boilerplate one that they give you. There's some things you can click on. I guess they have links to their references. And there's also some nice stylized elements and some, I guess, talking about the app. But this is what the boilerplate looks like. So if we check our directory, we'll open that directory. Here, this is the one that I just created. Open it in the code editor. Expand things a little bit. And then this is what it created for us. So this is the directory structure. We have a source folder, public, node modules, and then VS Code is just created by VS Code. So we can ignore these ones for the most part. We don't really need to worry about those. Source is the one that has the interesting stuff in it. Okay, and then within source, we also have a components folder. Assets, we don't really need to worry about that. And then it made a little icons folder, but that's also not important. The main thing here is we see some .vue files, right? We have I can make this a little bit bigger. We have some .vue files, right, in this components folder, and then also an app.vue at the root of the source directory. Okay, those are the important ones. So we'll look at the .vue files in a second. First thing I want to look at is, I guess, index.html. So we talked about this in the just regular front-end stuff workshop. In index.html is kind of the bones of our operation here, right? This is going to be the structure of our document. And when we look at it, it's not filled out really. It's fairly empty. And I guess if we look in our body tag here, right? Remember, this is where all the visual stuff for our app is going to be inside this body. There really isn't anything here. There's an empty div, which if we remember from last time, doesn't actually show anything on the screen. And then there's also just a link to a script tag. So what is going on here, right? Because this does not reflect what we see in our browser. So we'll go to the JavaScript file next. And this is, I guess, where some of the interesting stuff starts. So we're importing this function called createApp from Vue. So when we did npm install and install the Vue package, and it's sitting in this node modules folder. So it's going to use that. It's going to import this create function. And I guess also, this app is going to be later file. And it also imports some CSS. It's going to call this create function, and it's going to call mount on ID app. Okay, so if we look back at this HTML, we notice this div has the ID app. So what this is doing is it's going to take whatever functionality exists in this create app function. We don't really need to worry about it. And it's going to mount it to the div with that app ID. So this. So basically it's just going to replace this div tag with all of our view stuff. Okay, so we can kind of ignore this HTML, we ignore this JavaScript, and we're just going to work on the view things. And that's going to make our website or our development process a little bit easier. We don't have to worry about them separately. Okay, this is what the view file looks like. Okay, so this is I opened app.view, and this is the one that's in the root of this source folder. And there's kind of a lot of stuff going on here. So we'll zoom out a little bit more. We don't really need to read at the moment, but let's look at just the sections here. I'll minimize them. So a .view file consists of 3 sections, right? There's a script tag, and it looks kind of just like HTML. There's a template, and then there's a style. Okay, so those correspond to, we can check back at the document here if we want to see also, where I'm at here. Right, template is our HTML template. Script is just like an HTML. It's going to be all our JavaScript code in there. And style, just like an HTML tag, is for all our CSS. So we have 3 different components in the one file: script, template, style. So we don't need to split them up into a .css, a .js, and a .html file. They all exist in one file. And they can also come in any order. They don't need to be in this order. This is just the way the default one was provided. So within script, we write JavaScript. Within template, we write HTML. And then within style, we write CSS. So 3 different, I guess, languages in one file. All right, let's see if we can dissect this boilerplate app that it gave us. We'll look at the template. So this is where the HTML is, right? We'll start there because that's, remember, it's the structure of our website. So let's see if we can decipher some of the structure here. We notice that there is 2 sections. So there's header and there's main that's created. And this header has an image, view logo, and then it has another div, and it has this thing called hello world, and it says it has a message, you did it. So this is probably, if we look back at this other one, this is probably this section here, which leads me to believe that this section over here is this main and the welcome part. So let's test that, and let's just comment this out, save, and see what happens. Refresh. Oh, I might need to run this again. This is supposed to live refresh every time you save a file, but sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah, so as we can see, that went away. So that tells us that's what this part was. We'll leave it commented for now. But let's start to dig more into this, I guess. So the image we know, we've seen image before, and we've seen did before, but we've never seen this hello world, right, in HTML. That doesn't exist. Which is true, I guess. It doesn't exist in HTML. This is a custom view component, right? And this is kind of how Vue is going to compartmentalize our code, and we're going to use it within other files. So this hello world tag has actually been defined already in this other file. So if we look at the script, it's importing this hello world, right? It's the same one from components, hello world.view. So this file here, let's take a look at that, which is another Vue file. Okay, it has a style, has a script. I'll close the style because we don't really care about that right now. So now this is what's being imported. Inside this template, we can think that everything in here is being copied and pasted right where this is. Right, that's kind of what's happening. There's a lot of other fancy stuff happening under the hood with data management and reactivity, but that's kind of how you want to think of it. Okay, so here we see greetings. You've successfully created a project with, right? And that's where we get this part. So if I wanted to change it just in case, I could put testing text and run my, refresh this again. Yeah, there we go. Testing text, right? So that's right there. And it just has some links. Perfect. So I guess the most basic part is we can, in this components, we can make a new view file. We can put some HTML in this template. And then within our other ones, our other, I guess more the parent files, as long as we import it in the JavaScript section, we can use that as a tag. Okay, and we could also, if we wanted to, now that we've made it a section in code, we can copy and paste this, right? 3 of them. And that makes it easy to, I guess, reuse that section, right? 3 of them. So similar to writing a function in your other languages, right? We can reuse elements. Okay, back to the document. So that's, I guess, the structure of a component. The next thing we want to look at is, I guess, the main feature of these frameworks is kind of attaching data to these components individually. So rather than having to write this JavaScript stuff manually, a lot of it is handled for us under the hood. So let's take a look at the one it's provided, this hello world. We can see in the JavaScript here, there's a section props, okay, define props. This is written in the composition way, but we'll go over a different way to do it later. But what a prop is it's a value passed from a parent component to a child component. Okay, so in this case, this app, our whole app is the parent component, and the hello world, or I guess just this little bit here, is the child component, right? We copy pasted 3 of them. So our parent is passing this message prop. Okay, this is the name. We can define the name here. This is just a variable name. And then we've also given some data about this variable. So we told it the type's a string, and we said that it has to be there. It's required. Otherwise, the compiler will yell at us. And then in our HTML, we're using this value, okay, within these little double curly braces. The Vue documentation calls it mustache syntax. These two guys. So instead of just putting regular text in between these h1 tags, we open the double curly braces and we can use JavaScript there, right? So this is actually a JavaScript variable. If I wanted to put the message in here also, right, I could do the same thing. I could open a double one, put a message in there, and I could refresh. And it refreshes testing text, and then the message is also there. Okay, so that's what that double brace is. So the prop was passed from our parent. We've used it in our template. Okay, how do we actually pass it to the component? So we can see here, this is where we're passing it, this MSG value, right? Which is the same name as the prop, right? So we have to define it the same in here and out here. And then the syntax we use is just like any other attribute on an HTML tag. So similar to class or, like width, height, source, things like that. We just put it here and then we supply the value. Okay, so in this case, we've supplied a literal string value. If we wanted, this could also be a variable, right? And that's where things start to get, I guess, more complicated, and you can do some more complex stuff, as you can be passing variables that change dynamically, and these elements will update dynamically as you change the variable you pass to them. So, right, just to make sure we're doing this right, we can change this value, test message, and we'll see what happened. You would expect that this changes, and it does. Okay, so that's what that prop is doing. And right, the nice part about this is it's component, we can copy paste it, and I can do another message and a different message. And all of these components, they stay separate from each other. Even though they use the same code, they can have different arguments, they can be passed different props, and they exist independently of each other. Okay, So that's passing a prop, right? We just define the name there. We define the props in our script section, and we can use it in our template. The other thing we can do is, I guess, define data within our app or within our component and use it locally. So I'm going to make a new component, and I'll make a counter button of view. So this is going to be a component that has a button. I'm going to click it, and it's going to have a counter that increases. So we start with making the sections. Template, we need also script. We need also style. Okay. They can be in any order. This is the order I prefer. I like template at the top, but it's completely up to you. And we need to write some general, I guess, HTML for this component. So first thing I'll do is wrap everything in a div, which is handy. I'll give it a class name. We'll call this counter button. And then inside, what will I do? I'll put, how about a button that says click me. And I will put a h2 that has a number, or how about it says count number. So that's the basics of it. No JavaScript yet, just this HTML. I'll go back into my app. I'll get rid of some of these just so it's not cluttered. And I'll get rid of this main section and that import for that. And if I want to use that component I just made, so the counter button, first I have to import it. So just like the other ones, import counter button from components / counter button. Okay, it's grayed out in my editor because I'm not using it. Yours might not do that. And then I can just call it like another HTML tag. And if you want to not have the closing one, you can just add a slash at the end just to have one tag. And there we go. It's pretty much copy pasted this HTML from the template into here. So let's take a look at that. See what happens. There we go, button and the count. Okay, doesn't do anything yet, but it's there. So let's add some functionality in the script. So we can just write any JavaScript in this script tag, but we want, in order for it to update, or I guess maintain the reactivity, they call it, meaning that whenever these values change, the entire component is re-rendered. Okay, we need to kind of declare the variables in a special way. So if I define variables like this, whatever counter equals 0, and I do my code in here just like a regular function like this, when things update, it's not guaranteed that this component is going to re-render. Okay, so to let Vue do its magic, the stuff it does under the hood, we need to do this: export default, and then we open up brackets, and we do this data function. Okay, so this data function will return an object, JavaScript object, which is what these opening brackets are. And then here we list all of our variables. Okay, so like I did before, I want a counter, and I can set it to 0. And if I wanted any other variables, I would also name it here. Variable equals, I don't know, if I make it a string, and then, keep going down a list, comma, right? This is a JavaScript object. It's just key pairs separated by a colon and then comma separated. So I've made this counter variable. I don't need this one. I can get rid of it. And whenever this changes, Vue will re-render our element. Okay. So like before, we can actually change this to use that variable counter, right, within the double curly braces. This means it's actually using JavaScript and not just text. I'll refresh. Nothing should change. Perfect. Just means it's still working. Now we want some actual functionality to happen here. In our button, we can add an event. So before we did, I guess in our regular JavaScript, we did onClick event, and that was just for our regular JavaScript. But in Vue, we can kind of do it a little bit different. We have this directive v on click. Okay, so this is how we're going to do this in Vue. And these are called directives. They start with v dash, and then in this case it's on, and then there's the comma, semicolon, or colon. Is it semicolon or colon? It's colon, right? Yeah, it's colon. And then the event that we want. So in this case, on click. So this is the same thing as on click in regular HTML JavaScript, except the Vue way of doing it. And there's also a shorthand of writing this v on. We can just do the @ symbol. That's the exact same thing. But for now, I will leave it this way. So on click equals, and then in this quotes, I'm going to supply some more JavaScript. So there can be any JavaScript in here. Okay, so in this case, let's do counter. Actually, I need to do this dot counter plus plus. So increment the counter. Okay, just JavaScript code right in here. It needs to be this dot, okay, because we're referring to the specific component. We can have multiple components, and we want it to increment only the component that this button is attached to, right? Not all components, all of these counter buttons. We want to have multiple of them. So on click, it'll do this counter plus plus. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, we'll give it a try. There we go, count 1. And as we click, it goes up. Okay. And the magic with this is, now that we've made this a component, well, I can just make a bunch more and then run my app again. Oops. And go check it out. Now I have a bunch of buttons. Okay, they're not organized very nicely, but I can click on them and they're all independent, right? They don't, it's not like when I click one, they all increment. They're still individual components that have their own individual data and counter value. Okay, but they all use the same code. So that's really the cool part about Vue, right? And I guess frameworks in general. So what else can we do with this? We put this JavaScript code in the quotes here, but that's because it was only one line, I guess. If we have some more complex stuff, we're not going to want to put like 20 lines in this quote up here. It's going to get really messy. So what we'll do instead is in our export default object, so this big quotes here, right? We put another comma after this data function. We'll put another, I guess, key in here, methods, spell that. That's like this, another object. And in here, we can define methods or functions. So I'll make a function increment counter, just like this. That's the syntax for creating a function, right? If I wanted to put any parameters, I could put them in there. And then I can put the code in here. So I say this counter plus plus, semicolon or no semicolon, up to you. And then instead of, I guess, writing that code up here, I can just call this dot increment counter function call up here. So this should do the exact same thing. Let's make sure. Perfect. Right, except we can do a lot more code here. Now we can just make this function as long as we want. Okay. If we want to, I guess, create another function, we just comma separate, and then you declare another function here. Another function. Right, and then you can comma separate again. You can keep going as long as you want, as long as it's under this methods section. All right, perfect. I guess we can also put our props in here too. If this component had props, you would also do it here. Props, like this, another section, methods, props, data, okay? These section names are defined, I guess, and they're expected. They don't have to be here, but if you want that functionality, you need to declare it and then put the values under that tag. Excuse me. And that's all defined in the documentation, right? So props we see here. This is that export default in our script. And we can see props just like we put, and it puts them in an array. So our props would go there. Perfect. Okay, we made our clicker button. We can do a little bit of CSS on it if we wanted to, right, in the style down here. So I can just open this up and start writing some CSS. So I can select this class that I put on it, counter button. And then maybe I give it some padding, 5 pixels. Maybe I change the background color to be, get the color picker out. Maybe it's like a green, dark green view color. And then maybe I do a radius, 10 pixels. Okay. And this is going to apply just like if we included a style sheet in this HTML up here. So it's really simple, and we can style these components individually. Okay, let's take a look at that. There we go. It's got a green background on it now, right? And if I went back to making another multiple buttons, they would apply to them all. There we go. One button, another button. Okay, next, we made a little counter button. Let's do something a little bit more complicated. I want to make a to-do list, I guess, application. So I want a component, I guess that's this to-do list. So I should be able to make multiple of them if I so choose. That has a text box on it that I can type in a to-do, and I click the button, I click add, and it will add it to the list. And I'll just have a list of multiple components. So how do we go about doing that? Let's start with making a new component. So I'll make a component to-do list dot view. I'll copy paste from this one just so I don't have to write a bunch of stuff again. Erase the CSS. Erase this, and I'll erase that. And I'll put it in my main application. Get rid of the counters. Make sure to import to-do list. Ooh, not that, to-do list. And then I can add it here. Perfect. Let's actually make the component now. So I'll wrap everything in a div. Give it a class. I'll say this is called to-do list container. Then what do I need inside this container? I need input. So this is the HTML tag for a text box, or I guess an input. Oops, my Discord broke. I don't know if you guys can still hear me or not, but my Discord is not working anymore. Let me check. Do you guys hear me at all? Oh, hello? Okay, that was odd. I don't know if I cut out at all, but my Discord crashed or something. I don't know. Let's get the screen back up. Okay, brief interruption. We'll continue on. Connection died for a second. Thought it was my end. No, it was my end, I think. Anyways, continuing. Making a to-do list. Okay, we just started. We made a div. Give it a class name. We're going to add, this is our text box. So input is a tag in HTML. We give it a type. There's a bunch of different types. So there's like bigger text box, smaller text box. I don't even remember the other types, but this is the most common use one. It's just a text box. Okay, input. And then I also want a button that says add. And then, oops, sorry, a list UL. UL is the HTML tag for unordered list. There's also ordered list, OL. We want unordered list. And then inside it is going to be a bunch of li or list element, I guess. This is just an element in the list. And then inside these elements, we'll say it has an h2, how about, that has a number, and it has paragraph that has, this is a to-do item. Okay, let's check that, make sure that works. Perfect. So there's our text box, there's the add button, and then here's an example of an item. Okay, so now let's actually add the functionality where if I type something and I click add, it adds it to the list, right? It dynamically does it. So we're gonna need some props. So from our app, let's make just some starting items. Starting to-dos equal, I should make it an array. So I'll make this an array. This is in JavaScript, square brackets is array. The curly braces is an object. So I'll make an array of objects, give them IDs, and I'll give them descriptions. So this one can be register for Halloween. That's what to do. And let's do another one. ID 2. Description. Finish my homework. Third one, we'll only do 3. Description. Go to sleep. Okay, so there's some starting ones. We want these to be displayed automatically, and then we also want to be able to add to these. So I'm gonna have to pass this as a prop, right? Because this object exists in the app component, but it doesn't exist in my to-do list component yet. So that means I'm gonna have to pass it down, this kind of hierarchy here. So in this to-do list component, I'm gonna give it a prop. Let's call it starting to-dos, or yeah, starting to-dos equals. And then in view, if we're passing a component like this and we want it to dynamically update, we need to put this colon in front of it. And then we can put starting to-dos. Okay. The reason we didn't have to do that up here is because we supplied a literal value, right? So we just actually typed the message we want in here. If we want this to be a dynamic value, so it's a variable and it's changing, right? We need to put this colon here, which is shorthand for vbind. Okay, which is another directive, same as that von, and you can read more about that in the documentation. But we can get rid of it. Shorthand is just doing that. So we're passing the starting to do array into the to-do list component. So now let's, over here, we'll add our props field. And the prop we are getting is starting to-dos. And in props, instead of giving it a starting value, we have to define the type. So the type is an array. I think that's how I go about doing that. Let me check. Check this one real quick. And make sure. Yeah, that's right. Oh no, it's supposed to be object, not array. There we go. That's better. I'm not yelling at me anymore. So yeah, same as like this data. That's a function, or if we did the methods, it was also an object. We have to do that for props. Okay, so we're saying we're getting a prop called starting to-dos. It's of type array. View will handle the rest for us. Now we can just start using it. Okay. One thing we have to watch out for though is these props that are passed to us Okay, we can't use this value like in our code. We cannot modify it. It doesn't get passed back up to the parent. Okay, we essentially, if we want to use this value, we're gonna have to copy it. We can't expect that the changes we make to it will be reflected in the parent. And we can't pass that information back upwards, which makes things a little bit tricky. But you just have to design around that fact. So what we're gonna do is, I guess, in our data, so these are the variables that I'm declaring locally. We don't need a counter in this component. We do need our to-dos, which is just going to be, I guess, an array. So I could declare an empty array, right? That's the initial value, but I'm actually going to initialize it from the past value, this dot starting to-dos, right? I guess, remember, when we're using variables locally, we want to use this dot. So we make sure it's this component, not any other component. So we're initializing basing off this prop we got. Okay, what else are we going to want? We're probably going to want current ID value. We'll say it is starting to-dos length +1. Remember to get the commas separating these variables. Anything else? We'll add it in a second, I guess, if we need it. There's our variables. Now what I want to do is this list element here, right? This is my unordered list, the whole container, and this is just a single list element, right? Normally in HTML, if I want to add a bunch of elements, I'm going to have to copy paste this li tag, right? That's how I make a list. It's for every li tag inside a list, it's going to render it. Okay, but I don't really know how many of these are going to be, and it's supposed to be able to dynamically change with how many items are in this array. Okay, so what view lets us do is we can declare just one here, and inside the element that we want to duplicate, we can give this directive v4. Okay, we can say equals. Now in here, we write some JavaScript. So we'll say to do in this dot to dos. Okay, so for to do in this dot to dos, which is an array. Okay, so this is a range-based for loop, right? We're kind of writing a for loop in this tag. And what it'll do is copy paste this for every element that it can find in this array. And it's going to assign that element, I guess, to this to do tag. All right, so now I can use this. I can in H1, instead of just, or H2 here, instead of just putting number 1, I can use my little mustache braces. I can say to do dot ID. Just remember, if we go back, these items are all going to have IDs and descriptions. To do dot ID. Now I can replace this with to do dot description. Okay, so it's going to make a new list element for every to do it can find, and then it's going to populate the H2 with the ID and the paragraph with the description. Okay, so let's check, make sure that that's all working. Perfect. There we go. Okay, so we can see it's made 3 elements because it started with 3 to-dos, right? And it's found the ID and the description for each one. All right. I could add more to that starting list, or I could take away from the starting list and it would reflect here, right? So let's add the ability to add our own to-dos now. First thing we're going to need to do is to grab the value from this input text box. Okay, so doing that in Vue is as simple as doing v model. And then in here, I supply a variable name. Let's say current text. And because I need to make a new variable, I put it down here in the data section, current text, and I'll initialize it to just an empty string. Okay. So what this v model does is it's binding, I guess, whatever variable I put in here with a variable in our data. Okay. Whenever you type a character in this text box, it's going to update this variable. So what I can do is, can I write a function here? Actually, we'll leave it for now. Now that we have this text in our current variable, we need to get it. So this add function is going to add button is going to trigger a function. So we'll use that v on that we saw before, click. And here, I can do this actually, console log this dot current text. Okay, so on click, I'm gonna log the value of this variable. So that way we should be able to see what's happening, I guess, in behind the scenes here. So I'll open my developer console here too. And we can do this just like we did in our HTML stuff, right? We can look at the structure. In this case, I want to look at the console. So if I type some values and I click add, oops, that's not good. What happened? To-do list, starting to do's, what is it like? Cannot read properties undefined, log, to-do list, line 4. Maybe I can't actually put console.log in here. We'll change it. Let's say add to do. I'll put a function here. And then just like before, I'll actually move that function down to the script area. I'll call this function add to do. And from here, make sure to put the comma there, right in between these. Let's see if it likes that any better. No, why not? Add to do is not a function. Yeah, it is. Oh, of course. So here's a prime example of why we need this dot everywhere. Okay, because it's looking for a function called add to do, but it doesn't exist. We actually have this dot add to do because it's defined here, this dot. It's calling the function on this element. Okay, we always stick this dot in front of everything. Very important. And forget it lots like I did, and it'll confuse you and it won't be fun. It still doesn't work. Stuff to do is not a function. That's not true. It is a function. Methods. Here you can see in real time why I despise web development. Okay. Okay, so look, I can change the value in this text box. Remember, when I click add, it's just logging what the value of that variable. Okay, so as I take away and add elements, it's updating in real time. Okay, the button is only showing me what the current value is. So every time I type, it's updating. Okay, so that's what this model, V model, is doing. It's binding the characters that have been put into this input field to this variable. Okay, so now let's actually do the stuff we need to do instead of just logging the text. Let's grab it. We're going to say, so we need this dot to do's dot push. Okay, so it's an array, just like C++ push back to a vector. We push to an array in JavaScript. And we need to push an object. Just remember that this to do's is an array of objects that have ID and description. And we defined that earlier. JavaScript is kind of a little annoying like that with no types. You kind of have to know, just remember the type of things. So we're pushing, the ID will be equal to, let's set it to this dot current ID, and we'll increment it after so that we always get a new ID. And then the other field is description, which is going to be set to current text. Right, so I'm just making a new object similar to this one, these ones in the app, right, that have the ID and the description, except I'm dynamically filling it with the ID, which I initialized in the beginning to just be set to the length of that array plus 1. And I'm incrementing it after every time. So every post has a new ID. And I'm setting the description field to be whatever was in that text box whenever I clicked add. Okay. I can also, at the end, set that current text to empty, so it gets rid of it. And that should be about it. Let's see if that worked. Okay, so for text box, I'll say new to do, and I'll click add, and there we go. Made a new element in there, right? So remember, all we had to do was just push back to that array, and Vue automatically added it to this, added a new list element for that, right? Because it existed in this array, it counts as a new loop through in our for loop, and it re-rendered the entire component because our data in this data changed, right? The array increasing, decreasing, or an element in the array changing triggers this re-render. And it triggers only this specific instance of the component too. So it's optimized like that. That's some tricky stuff under the hood. So yeah, that's about it, right? Add some more new to-dos. I can add as many as I want. Right, you see it clears the text also at the end. That's what I got from setting it to 0. If I didn't do that, I rerun it, that text would just still be in there. Right, if I new to do, and I press add, it just stays in there. And I could spam it if I wanted to. But in this case, I would want to get rid of it after. So there we go. There's a simple to-do list, right? If I wanted to make it even more complex, I could break this list element into another component, and I could pass this to-do as a prop, do things even proper. You want to break things down into components to reuse them, to simplify each of these files, right? That's the general idea there. Now I can go back to the main file, and I can make a bunch of these to-do lists, as many as I want, and I can set them, maybe these ones start empty. They can just start with empty arrays. They don't have to use that one. Let's refresh. There we go. I have 3 to-do lists. This is the one that already has things in it, right? These other ones are also independent, right? Another to-do list, right? They all exist independent of each other. You can see it can add empty to-dos. Maybe we need to add a check to make sure it's not empty, right? But you get the idea, right? We can add all these components. We can add some of our buttons back. We have a crazy sick app with a bunch of buttons and to-do lists. Super cool. I think we can make some big money with this. Yeah, buttons, clicking, do's. Okay, so that's about it. That's kind of everything I wanted to cover. You can get really deep into this stuff, right? So maybe one thing I'll show you is we look at this life cycle diagram here that I linked. And this shows, I guess, more of the behind the scenes things that are happening in Vue. And there's this thing called the life cycle. So as the app is created and I guess deallocated, certain methods are called in a certain order. So here at the beginning, this is that app.mount and the create app that we saw earlier. So that happens at the very beginning. And as we kind of continue through the path, you can see these little red areas are hooks, lifecycle hooks. So they happen at certain points in time, goes down through here. And this is kind of the main data loop. So there's on, before updated, on, updated. And this happens after mounted. Whenever the data is changed, the DOM, it's called virtual DOM, is re-rendered. So that's what's happening whenever our data is updated. It re-renders the elements. These lifecycle hooks, we can, if we want to trigger specific things to happen at that time, you just pick whatever one we want. And then in the JavaScript, we can, I guess, on here, we can do on, before, mount, right? We can just call these lifecycle hooks on, before, mount, or before mounted, or setup, mounted, on, update, right? Any of these, we call these functions in here, and this code will be executed at that point in the lifecycle. So as you do some more complex things, you need to trigger specific maybe API calls or database accesses, right? You kind of need to do them at specific points. So this is a handy thing to reference. And you'll probably see that a couple times in the documentation if you read through it. It's a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about right now. So yeah, I think I got through everything I wanted to. Oh yeah, I can, we'll add one more thing, I guess, why not? So maybe in our buttons, we'll go back to our buttons, we'll change something. Let's say, I'll add another H1. It just has some text in it. Hi, it says. Okay, but maybe I only want this element to show up if my counter is greater than 10. So we did this in our JavaScript 1 where we kind of added a tag, a CSS tag to make it invisible. But Vue has a very nice way of doing that, a lot easier. We can use another directive called vif. Okay, so it's pretty much the same as for, except just an if statement. Right, and we can put our JavaScript in here. So we can say counter, or not counter, this dot counter. This should also be this dot counter. I don't know why that worked. This dot counter is greater than or equal to 10. Then it will render this element. So this element or any of its children are only rendered if this statement is true, right? We also have, we could do, right, there's the else, which is just, I guess the else end of that statement. And I can put no hi, sad. There you go, not hungry, sad. So let's look at that. Do I have any buttons? Yeah, I do. Okay, so each of these, no hi, right? And if I ever increment any of them past 10, there we go, right? And they're all still individual, so I could make them all go up. So that's another directive. Just like v4, there's vif, there's also v else if for else ifs, and then else, right? So you can do some pretty complex stuff there. I think that is finally what I wanted to get through. Yeah, there we go. Use the documentation. If you take one thing away, is this link will be very helpful in making things. Okay, I've learned Vue probably a million times, and I always forget it. So that documentation is a lifesaver. Okay. Otherwise, that is going to be it. I don't know if there's any questions or anything. If not, tomorrow will be, I guess, the last workshop in the series. Is there a way to skip a re-render, like to make it not render when your counter hits 2? So you're saying maybe like if the counter is 2, don't show it at all, otherwise do show it? Or after 2, don't show it at all, or only don't show it when it's 2? I should actually show this so it doesn't seem like I'm just sitting here in silence. There we go. Still acknowledges the value has been credited to, but the render does not occur. So okay, interesting. Do I know how to do that? I can tell you with certainty that there absolutely is a way to do that. It's just I don't know how to do that. Let's take a look at that life cycle diagram. Maybe that might give us some clues. No, here's what I would do if I actually wanted to know the answer. Prevent render, prevent updating component. Let's see what that does. Prevent re-rendering component on prop update. What do we got here? Nope, that's not what I want. What's this? Should component update. This looks like it might be what you're thinking of here. So here's a whole write-up on this stuff. I can guarantee you that there is a way to do it. Like I said, I despise this stuff working in front end. It's a good skill to have, and like if you're doing hackathons and stuff like that, you kind of need to be able to do this stuff. And this is the one I like the most, or the other ones. You don't even get me started on like React. Ugh, I hate that. It sucks. But yeah, direction. Yeah, exactly it. Device view, learn this thing after doing React favor. It looks very similar. Yeah, it is. It is similar. I get they're all similar. Angular, React, Vue, in a way that they achieve the same thing. It's just syntax and small semantics. Um, this one's a little bit easier, I think, to understand from having no experience. React, you could probably do a lot more with, but I don't know. I like Vue. Okay, I'm gonna shut everything down now. Tomorrow, last workshop in the series, we're gonna be doing just kind of more of a theoretical talk on how to like architect your applications. So maybe splitting application into multiple components. We'd call that microservices, not components, is in Vue like visually, but functionally. So maybe you would have a microservice that does like database access. If your application had like payment, or it had I don't know, it interacted with other pieces of code, you could split them into microservices. And then we talk about communication between these services through APIs, REST APIs, or remote procedure calls, things like that. Even just maybe we start with just databases, things like that. We won't go into the details on how to do it because it's probably a little bit too much to do over the course of a hackathon, but it's good to think about. And if you can show that you're thinking about that kind of stuff and you're planning your application out for development after a hackathon, I think that's worth some points in my book. So that'll be the subject of tomorrow. Okay, that'll be all for today. Thank you guys for showing up.